Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for coming today. My name is Caroline Melkonian. I'll be your mediator today. I've been mediating for, 10 years now, and I received this case from your attorneys. Um, can you introduce yourselves and let me know how you'd like to be called?
Sure, I can go. My name is Zami Hemingway, and you could call me Zami.
Okay, Sami, thank you.
Hi there. My name is Dylan. I'm the plaintiff in this case, and you can just refer to me as Dylan.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome. So we're here today to come to an agreement. I know that you have been working with your attorneys on this, and your hope is to come to some sort of agreement today. Are there any other decision makers that we need to be aware of?
No, I'm not currently.
Not at this time.
Okay, very good. Very good. Well, let me explain my role. My role here is a neutral party. I have no interest, although I'm interested, I have no interest in the outcome for either of you. My goal is to help guide you to have productive conversations so you can come to an agreement that works for each of you. Okay. Now, this is a voluntary process. So I know you're here voluntarily. And if at any time you feel like you want to conclude, please raise that to me and we'll have a conversation about that. Okay. Today, we will meet in joint session, meaning both of us together. And we may meet in some private sessions. Sometimes I'll call a private session so I can get more information to help me understand what these specifics are and what your interests are. If at any time you want to caucus with me, I call it a caucus. If you want to caucus with me privately to tell me something that you don't want to say in front of the other person, just let me know and we can go into that private caucus. And anything we talk about in that private session is confidential. So it's a safe space for you to tell me what you want to tell me privately. I won't share that unless you tell me that I can. It's also a good place for kind of doing some brainstorming, and we'll do some of that too. But you can brainstorm without having to commit to a particular resolution. Okay, do you have any questions about that?
And
Okay.
at this time.
All right, I'll remind you about that too. Um, I just want to remind you that agreements that we make are not final until we actually sign off. Okay, so you can feel free to make suggestions, do that brainstorming, generate some options for resolution without being afraid that you're committed to it. Okay. Remember, in mediation, we're here to cooperatively find a resolution that works for each of you. And that means you're not all, each of you can't get everything that you want, right? We're going to have to make some concessions and focus on what's really important to you. Okay. Now, there is some structure around this. I just want to go over really quickly. So there are some stages that we'll go through. This first stage is, me explaining to you how this is going to work and what I am going to do, my role in this. The next thing I'd like to do is find out the facts. I want to hear from each of you. Um, and I'll ask some additional questions too, so I can get more information and understand you better. So that will be our next stage. And then we'll talk about generating some options. I've said that before, but we'll talk about what are some ways in which we can resolve this. And I'd encourage you to listen really closely to the other person when we're talking about these facts, because that will help you generate options that meet both of your interests. Okay. I know this is a very sensitive topic. I'm well aware of that. Um, but each of you has your own perspective. And when we listen to the other person and hear what their perspectives are, it sometimes changes our perspective and can help you come up with ideas that may help resolve this. Okay, so after we generate some options, we can start to negotiate, and I can help you with that. We'll try to narrow in on some options that work for you, and we can go back and forth and see how one particular option or two options can actually work for the other person too. So we'll do some negotiation there and hopefully come to an agreement that we'll put into writing. Okay. Are there any other questions before we get started? Okay. Very good. Thank you. So let's get started hearing some of the facts of the case, hearing your perspectives on those facts. I'd like to start with you, Dylan, since you are the plaintiff here. Is that okay, Zami, if I start with Dylan? Great. Dylan, can you tell me from your perspective what is going on here? What would you like for me to know and for Zami to hear?
Sure. I mean, you've asked about the facts in the case, so I can be pretty clear about that. I have a 5-year-old daughter, who Zami's son, both verbally, emotionally, and physically abused during a period of time in which he was babysitting her. My daughter suffered significant trauma as a result of that. We had to go take her to a clinic that confirmed that she was molested. She's had to undergo a long process of therapy to recover from this trauma. This has
Let me just stop you there for 1 second. So, well, okay, so you say that she was verbally, emotionally, and physically molested by
correct,
Zami's son. Okay, I'm so
correct.
okay, that's hard. That's hard.
Yes, incredibly.
Yeah.
It's put incredible strain on myself, on my family, to have to deal not only with the trauma of trying to help my daughter through this process, but
Yes.
as a result of this, we've had to move. My wife and I have been facing difficulties in trying to handle all of this. And then, on top of all of this, we've now had all of these incredible expenses as I'm still trying to provide psychological care for my daughter. And just this has been an incredibly difficult process for me. And now we've gone into this legal situation because
Okay.
we're seeking repairs for everything that's going on. And I'm here today because I mostly don't want to have to keep dealing with all of this, but I do need culpability to be recognized, and I need some kind of reparations paid. I mean, my daughter's going to suffer for this for the rest of her life, and I feel that there needs to be some responsibility taken. So I've agreed to mediation because I'm happy to try and reduce the amount of emotional and psychological burden on all of us, but that is why I'm here today.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Dylan. It sounds like you became aware of this. I don't know if it was an incident or incidences, um, and you've taken steps to try to um, make sure your daughter's been taken care of, but it's had some significant impacts on you and your family. And in fact, you've had to move.
Yes,
Oh,
that's correct. I mean, I'm referring to one incident in this case. I can't
yes.
obviously speak to what else Zami's son has been doing. I mean, there's clearly concern for me, potentially once an offender, potentially other times, but at least with my daughter, I only know of one incident.
Okay. Can you share with me the incident that you're referring to? Can you tell me more details about that?
Sure. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there myself. Basically, Zami's son was babysitting my daughter while me and my wife were out. Zami was my neighbor at the time.
I see.
Um, we had relatively good relationship. I had briefly met his son off and on, and had offered to babysit for my daughter. Um, Per what I have understood from my daughter, Zami's son um, fondled her for somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes while babysitting her. It also seems very likely that he verbally and emotionally abused her while acting as her babysitter, while he was basically unaccompanied and alone with her. Um, again, there's the possibility this has happened more than once. I just know about this one specific incident. And then beyond that, I mean, the only other thing I can share is that we went to this very well-known out-of-town clinic that specializes in these kind of cases, and psychologist there examined her and did determine that she had been molested, and that there was a very, very good chance this was going to end up having a severe psychological impact on her for the rest of her life. So those are the facts as I know them, as my daughter has reported them to me, as independent psychologists have reported it to me. So that is what I currently understand from the incident.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like you were friendly with Zami and his son. You felt comfortable with asking the son to babysit, and then you found out from your daughter that, in fact, he had fondled her.
Correct. I mean, me and Zami were plenty acceptable neighbors. I had no issues prior, and I knew nothing about the son other than he was available and willing to babysit.
Hmm. Was that the only time he had babysat for you?
It was not the only time that he babysat. He had done it, I believe, a few other times before. I couldn't say with any certainty. And again, I cannot say if this was the first time that she was molested by him during those times. This is the only one that I know about. It is totally possible that this was a repeated incident and that it took her time to build up the courage to tell me. I don't know.
Mhm.
I have serious concerns that it may not have been the first time. And again, this goes back to my earlier concern that I think there's also going to need to be a wider discussion on who else may have been affected by Zami's son. But on a personal level, I don't know if this were incidents that happened multiple times. I just know about the one that my daughter finally was able to tell me about, and that psychologists confirmed that she had clearly suffered from molestation, but they were not able to specifically tell me if it was repeated or one instance. They just confirmed the experience itself.
Okay, so you're aware of one incident that you've had confirmed with a psychologist.
Correct.
Okay. And how long was it between the time of the babysitting incident and the time that your daughter reported that to you?
She told me about it within the days that immediately followed, and we did our due diligence to go, check with her, see how she was doing mentally. And of course, we did take the process of going to see an out-of-town clinic as quickly as possible to basically confirm what she was saying. I mean,
Okay. So you took her to the out-of-town clinic. Is that the only medical professional that you utilized?
no, we did call a family doctor, but
I see.
the doctor is not a specialist in child molestations, and this obviously needed to be both a psychological and physical assessment, and the doctor was not necessarily equipped to assess that on his own. I mean, I am not alleging that my daughter was raped by any means, so there was no physical proof left behind that could have been immediately identified by a doctor.
All right. So you took her to the doctor and the out-of-town clinic.
Correct.
Make sure she was okay. Okay. All right. Um, why don't we speak to Zami and hear his side of the story? Zami, go ahead, please.
Yeah. I just want to acknowledge that this is a very difficult situation. We both have children involved in this situation, and clearly everyone's experienced some form of harm right now, and emotional harm. Like my son was arrested, and that has created quite a bit of psychological damage for him as well. He was released because, there is no evidence that supports this claim. And my son only babysat one other time, and we have not heard of any, never witnessed my son verbally abuse his daughter. Um, we never had any type of complaint. That's not in his character to do anything along those lines. And, my son's a good kid. And so we also want to be able to figure out how to make sure everyone heals through this process and everyone gets the support they need, um, and try to figure out a solution. For me, I don't have very much different to say from what Dylan shared around, what's the facts have been laid out. These are the facts that have been shared with me as well. The only thing that I want to clarify is that, my son has not ever had any experience doing, no one's ever accused him of this before. I've never witnessed him engaging any type of behavior that would be questionable. Um, we
Okay.
were neighbors. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to reflect back some of the things that I've heard. So your son was arrested, and it sounds like that was very difficult for him and obviously for you. Um, what did you and your son talk about after he was arrested?
So when he was arrested, I checked in with him to see how he was feeling, if he knew what they were talking about, if, hear his side of the story. For him, he adamantly says no, he has not, didn't verbally abuse anyone, that he babysat and did what was asked. And and that's about it. He's a little shocked about this as well. And so for me, I know that this is a very difficult situation. I can't even imagine if my child said that this happened to them. And so we're trying to just move through this with as much sensitivity as possible, understanding as possible, and wanting to resolve it.
Yeah. So you said your son was shocked about these accusations. Do you want to tell me more about that?
Like when we talked, he from what he said, that it was just a normal babysitting, right? So he watched her, made sure that she ate, made sure she went to bed. He's not sure where these accusations are coming from. And so, um, yeah, he was very surprised by it.
So he was really surprised and he doesn't have any explanation for where the accusations came from.
Correct.
You also said that he babysat on one other occasion. So was that prior to this incident here or after?
I believe it was prior to the incident.
Okay, so just that one other time. Okay. Okay. Dylan, hearing from Zami's side of the story, is there anything else that you want to add?
No, I mean, I can hear Zami is denying something that's already been confirmed, which is, I guess, his right. I appreciate that he's recognizing the incredible emotional toll this has put all of us through. I am not seeing that when I've reached out to him, his lawyers, or his insurance company. There's very little recognition of what Zami is currently saying. So I'm glad to hear that he's bringing that up here in this space to make himself seem a little bit more open to it. That's not really felt like the way that things have been communicated so far. I'm sorry to hear that there's been difficulty for him as well. But there's obviously a very big difference. I'm also I don't know what to say about the son. I'm glad that he is able to contend that nothing has happened and that he feels that he is without fault. That is clearly not the way that I feel, and clearly not the way that state psychologists will feel. So yeah, I don't know what else I would add in this particular case other than that that's all well and good. I agree with Zami that a resolution is in all of our best interest to put this to an end, but I'm not I don't really have anything else to add at this point. You know, I'm quite certain of what's happened, and I'm quite certain of the fact that I would like to see some kind of reparation happen for all of this, and I'd like recognition from Zami's son of what happened, and I'm not hearing any of that. So I don't know what else I can add in this point.
So I hear you saying that you would like reparation and a recognition from the son. Could you explain that in a little more detail?
Sure, I'm very happy. As a result of what Zami's son has done, I have had to move. I've had serious concerns about the well-being of my daughter, potentially living next to someone who may have been traumatizing her and continued to traumatize her. The very presence of that person could continue to pose her trauma. This is something even the psychologist told to us. So I have had to pay for incredibly expensive therapy for my daughter, to try and recover from this process, which has had an incredible cost on me. I have
So
had to move
you've
as
incurred,
a
you've
result.
incurred the moving expenses
The moving
as
expenses,
well
exactly.
as
Thank
the
you.
therapy expenses.
Agreed. The therapy expenses, the moving expenses of having to move to a new place to get away from this situation. And then on top of that, on top of all of this difficulty, the incredible strain that this has placed upon me and my family has meant that, you know, I have been separated from my wife for a little while. We've had an incredibly hard time managing all of this and figuring out how to deal with all of this.
So
And so, you know, we are
you and your wife's physically separated.
correct.
Yes.
Correct. After we moved, we had a very difficult time. We've now begun to be comfortable getting back together, but we have had to split for a long period of time while trying to manage the difficulty of what's been happening and the increased psychological strain on ourselves and on our daughter. And that it has just caused an incredible amount of difficulty for everyone involved. Add to that legal fees, the fees of having to pay for these assessments, the fees for being in touch with these psychologists. I mean, it has been going on and on and on. And it feels like I am just trapped in this endless cycle of having to provide for my daughter in the aftermath of this traumatic stuff while still trying to hold my family together. I mean, that the worst that's happened here for Zami is his son got arrested. That sounds plenty fair to me for what he's done. So I don't understand how we can really be having any other kind of conversation. Then what are we going to do to resolve any of this?
So clearly, this has taken a toll on your family and each of you individually. And I can tell that you're very frustrated.
Yes.
And I will help guide you so that we can come to some resolution today. Um, I do want to get a little bit more detail, but before I do, I just want to refer to Zami and hear from you, Zami. Is there anything that you'd like to say at this point in response to what you heard?
You know, I know that this is quite a bit has happened. You know, I empathize with Dylan, and this is when it's involving children, it's always very difficult, and everyone is having to address um, quite a bit of changes, right? And so I hear the frustration, I hear the anger and the upset. I do want to say that you know, the psychologists that they're referring to in this clinic that they're referring to, you know, they're also being investigated of having several claims right now that they've forced children to or led children to believing that they have been molested. You know, several of their most recent cases have been overturned. And so I'm not saying that nothing happened to his daughter. I'm not saying that. I'm also, you know, how can we really trust the validity of a clinic who has made the reputation on getting children to say that they've been molested, and then several of their cases have been reinvestigated and overturned.
So
So
Zami, you're saying that this out-of-town clinic, they've been accused of pressuring children.
Correct, of saying that they've been molested. And there's been several cases recently that have been reinvestigated and proven not to be true. And I'm not saying nothing happened to his daughter. I'm not saying that. It's
Mhm.
clear that there's a toll that's happening, and that there's a reparations that, folks would like to have. And I'm willing for us to talk about what that can look like. And the reason why I have not, you know, is how can we trust the validity of this clinic, that's currently undergoing this investigation, right, for falsifying claims. And so, I just want to put that out there. That's really important to also hold that as well, um, in this process.
I mean, that's patently ridiculous. Wait, that is completely ridiculous. Both of us know that those psychologists will stand up in trial and testify and be recognized as plenty recognized experts in this field. Zami is bringing this up as some way to try and diffuse from the very clear fact that at the end of the day, if this goes to trial, there are going to be state psychologists who stand up and have this exact same thing. Whether or not the clinic is under question is a completely different thing. We've had the same problem with the district attorney here, who has refused to move parts of this case forward, despite the fact that he repeatedly has refused to move forward child molestation cases, exactly like this one, who has also been investigated by several watchdog groups for the exact same thing. So this is a distraction. I mean, at the end of the day, we know very well that we can end up going to trial, bringing up these psychologists, and they will be recognized as plenty competent experts. The idea of saying, oh, this invalidates in some way that experience is, I find completely ridiculous and a complete obfuscation of the reality here, which is any lawyer will advise me or Zami or anyone else that these psychologists will still be recognized in court as completely competent experts.
So Dylan, clearly your belief is that these experts are in fact credible. So tell me a little bit more about the clinic. How did you find them? And why did you make the choice to use that clinic?
They were recommended to me by my doctor. They were recommended to me by my doctor. My overall feeling was I looked into who would be the people best suited to addressing my daughter's needs and who had the most experience with doing this. I had seen the same claims that Zami had, and yet despite those claims, they still came recommended as the best clinic for this. I think
So
with any
let me just pause for 1 second if I could. So you had seen those claims?
I had seen claims that, like any other major hospital, said that there were some issues. I had reached out to several of my friends and doctors and the doctor that I work with who still recommended this clinic. I still worked with them. I did not at any time. I was present for most of the process when, except for more sensitive periods during which psychologists were one-on-one with my daughter, I did not feel at any time that she was being coerced. I did not feel at any time that there was anything, and everything she was saying was in line with what she'd already told me. Nothing had changed since then. So
You feel pretty confident about the the care that you received.
I do feel relatively confident. Do I know every single step of the process that happened? No. Have I heard that there have been issues with the clinic? Sure. But I still feel that the doctors who tended to my daughter were clear, competent professionals, and I have relative faith in what they've said. And I am very confident that if this comes to trial, then they will testify and be recognized as experts by the state who are completely competent and able to do their jobs.
Okay. So you had seen, let me just be real clear. You had seen the claims that Zami's referencing prior to utilizing their services.
I had heard of some negative issues. I had
Prior,
heard, as with
prior.
any doctor, negative reviews on Google, negative reviews on various other things that claimed various things like someone was rude to me, the receptionist made me wait too long.
Were those the claims that you heard
Are you
about?
asking me that question?
Yes, you indicated you had heard some claims. I just want to make sure I understand. You had heard some claims. Were the claims that the receptionist was rude, or were they different claims?
You, those are the claims that I'd heard. I'd heard issues about previous doctors who had been let go. Zami's attorney added in these additional claims about also questions of children being coerced into
So
things, and
those
he
are new
provided
claims.
sources for this. So I'm not contesting that some of those may have existed. I had heard of previous issues about the clinic. I had been assured by my doctor, by other lawyers, that there wouldn't be any issue.
So
Um,
you felt confident based on your
I
doctor.
felt quite confident, and their reputation was otherwise pretty stellar. When I asked around about who is the authority on this, I was referred to them.
Hmm. And who else did you ask? You said you asked around?
I asked my doctor. He made this recommendation. I did some researching. I reached out to a support group. Um,
Okay.
Mostly I took the advice of other medical professionals.
Yes.
And
Okay.
to clarify, I myself am not a medical professional. I use the connections of my doctor, who made recommendations based
Great
on
references for you. Okay.
correct.
I understand. And before I jump over to Zami, you also mentioned something about the DA. What was that in reference to?
Sure. I mean, this case was brought. The initial charges. Zami mentioned his son was arrested. Charges were initially dropped. Um, our district attorney hasn't processed. I mean, you know this as well as I do, Carolyn. The district attorney has refused to move forward on any child molestation cases brought in front of him, including some that are severely egregious. We have had several campaigns against him by local child rights organizations complaining about the fact that he seems completely and utterly insensitive to children's issues. I mean, his record with education has been terrible. So, my overall feeling is, if we really want to start talking about the questioning of higher authorities, the district attorney has made it clear that he's unwilling to move forward on cases like this, which is why the initial charges against Zami's son were dropped. It's why I've had to now take this to trial through my own separate means, as directly suing Zami and his son, rather than bringing this up through the typical legal channels, because the district attorney won't move forward with any child molestation case. And that has been a proven track record, that he simply refuses to engage on these types of cases. So, if we really want to play the game of the, larger authorities aren't getting involved, there's a perfectly good example for you. We have a police force and a district attorney who are unwilling to deeply investigate some of these claims.
So you're suggesting that because this DA never prosecutes any child molestation cases, that it's possible that's why Zami's son was not
I,
charged?
I'm suggesting that we have seen a consistent unwillingness by the DA to
I see.
go into these questions, and whether or not that is the reason they didn't proceed, I'm not going to guess. But I'm happy to pull up the reports by these child rights groups that have basically accused the DA of this and have been doing their own watchdog process into him. So, if we're going to go into questioning the clinic's validity, we can also go into questioning the very system that investigated Zami's son. I think all of that is aside from the clear fact here, which is we are dealing now, between me and Zami, with a clear case of molestation that needs to be resolved. And we've had to almost take it to trial as a result of that.
Yes. Well, thank you for explaining that for me. Zami, what impact has this had on your family life?
Yeah.
On you, your spouse, if you have one, your son?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. My son is in the process of going to college. He's been offered several scholarships to national universities. He has a bright future. Like I said, he's a great kid. He's a great student. No issues. He's never been arrested before. If this went to trial, could severely impact him. And, I understand the reputation of the DA, and the DA is also elected official, right? And so clearly the DA is doing something right if we keep electing him. And just like there's a watchdog for the DA, there's a watchdog for a clinic. And I feel like the difference is that this clinic makes money off of these claims and built their reputation on making money off of these types of claims. Whereas the DA built their reputation on deciding whether or not something is a criminal offense or not. And so there is a difference. One's a money making opportunity and the other one's not. And so, this clinic I have a lot of concern about because three of the most recent cases that they had the last couple of years have said they lied about what happened. And so if these are the folks who are the people who are the authority on child molestation, shouldn't they be able to suss out whether or not a child is falsifying information? That's part of their job. And so, there's some overzealousness that's happening there, and there's a watchdog group that's also watching them and bringing all this to light. And so, that's very difficult when we're in the process of trying to get my son ready for college. He should be able to be excited about his offers, be focusing on which university he's going to go to so that he can continue his future. And I understand that what is going on for Dylan's daughter, that there's some trauma there. And so I empathize with that. I'm not saying that nothing happened to her, but I am saying that this is not the something that I ever have known my son to do. And so it's been very difficult for us to try to celebrate where he's at and also hold the weight of what's going on. He's Charges have been dropped. And so we're trying to move on. We do feel that, I hear the toll that this has had and the trauma that Dylan's daughter has experienced. I can hear that based off of what Dylan is sharing. And we've all experienced some sort of loss uh and stress over this. And so, my son, we want him to see counseling if needed, so that
So you like he's not in counseling right now?
currently no, but if that's something that's needed, we'll have him select a therapist and get counseling, a counselor of his choice,
Good.
to help him also process this. Everything's kind of just been moving really quickly, and it feels like we haven't been able to get our footing also.
Okay. And has that impacted his ability to get into colleges?
Well, he got into a few and has a couple of scholarships, but depending on, this could severely impact his life. And so it's really difficult for him to be focusing on continuing school. It's his last year in school, so him trying to finish school, focus on scholarships, focus on where he's gonna go. Um, but between this and making that decision and him trying to be a teenager, is pretty difficult.
Yeah, I understand it's been difficult for him, but thankfully he is able to focus on college. Okay. Um, so how do you respond, Zami, to the claims about the other verbal and emotional abuse to Dylan's daughter?
I'm not sure when that would have happened. Like I said, my son's only babysat twice. They have never said anything to me about that. None of all of this came. We weren't made aware of any of this until police showed up at our door.
So
Um,
when the police showed up, that's when you found out about all the claims, the emotional, verbal, and
correct,
physical abuse. All okay.
correct. And we have been neighbors, and so if we're neighbors, when was the time that they would be able to do that? When she was 5 years old at the time, and so it's not like she's just out by herself. And so I just don't know when that opportunity was. And if that happened during the babysitting, that was never brought to my attention, I would have immediately said something to him had it ever been brought to my attention that he was verbally abusing her. Um, and, like I said, that's not my son's nature. And so I don't know if him redirecting her at some point landed differently or landed harshly. I'm not sure how they.
You're wondering if it could be a misunderstanding or miscommunication.
Correct, right.
but that he only babysat for her twice.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And you found out about the all the accusations at the same time.
Correct.
All right. Um, Dylan, is there anything you wanted to respond to before what I'd like to do is bring you into some individual private sessions so we can talk about different ways to come to some resolution. Dylan, is there anything you want to respond to before we do that?
No, I feel I've made my position pretty clear. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that there have been difficulties for Zami's son in selecting how he's best going to move forward with his future. That is very unfortunate. I think we can both understand what it is to be worried about a child's future right now, in a lot of senses. And I'm glad that his biggest questions are which school he goes to and what scholarship he accepts. I am spending a lot of my time deciding what psychologist to get my child treated for and how I'm going to move forward dealing with all of the additional costs to myself. So, I empathize with wanting the best for one's children, but I still think we're talking about two very different things here, and I'm happy to keep this process going, if only to see how we can resolve it.
Yes. Well, I think we're all in agreement that we do want to come to a resolution, and I appreciate what you're saying about the toll this has taken on your daughter. Um, what I'd like to do, Zami, is bring you in first, since Dylan went first last time. So if Francis can send us into a private room, Dylan, I should. Okay. Hi, Zami. Um, Zami, what ideas do you have for resolving this?
So
I hear Dylan talking about all these costs that he's incurred. Um, I know that your insurance company has made an offer that was not accepted. I think we were at 61,000, if I remember correctly. What what ideas do you have based on what you've heard, the emotional toll that this has taken on Dylan's daughter, Dylan, his wife? What kind of ideas do you have in mind?
you know, I'm willing to settle um as quickly as possible. Um, I don't want this to impact my son or his daughter more. Like I said, like this is a very difficult situation. Um, and my insurance company, they are willing to
I just want to
increase.
I just want to remind you, this is confidential, what we're talking about. So you can tell me what your insurance company is willing to.
Yeah, so they are willing to increase it from 61,000, which was the offer,
Mhm.
to up to 100,000 to settle the case. Potentially, they just want me to, and some they kind of want me to leave my son hanging. And I don't necessarily want to do that.
Tell me more about that.
They're willing to pay up to $1,000, but only if I agree to be dismissed from the suit, and that the suit is just against my son. And, I feel by doing that, that in some ways is me giving him and others the idea that my son's guilty. And, my son has not, when we talked about it, he did not say that he did this. He was, like I said, he was very surprised by the accusation. And he hasn't shifted from there. And I've never, like I said, I've never experienced my son to behave in the ways that's been listed, and that Dylan's daughter has said that he's behaved in. And so, I'm also willing, if we do the go up to 100,000, then I'm also willing to give, another 50K of my own money to bring it up to 150, but I would like to keep the settlement as low as possible. If I add my own money, that's majority of my savings account. Um,
Gonna ask you, so you have 50,000 in cash?
yeah, that's majority of my savings account. I I really don't want to do that, go up to that, because like I said, I just feel that if I end up doing that, that's also gonna make it seem like my son's guilty, and I don't want to do anything that makes it seem that he's guilty, or makes him feel like I'm not supporting him.
How would that make it seem like your son is guilty?
Well, I mean, if I'm paying money out of my pocket, then, why would I pay anything if he's innocent? Me wanting to pay is honestly wanting to help everyone just move on with their lives. I understand that this has been a financial toll from what Dylan's sharing, and that him and his wife has had some issues. And, when there's harm done to a child, like that can be a toll on your family. I understand that. And this has also impacted our family too. Like like I said, my son can't move on. You know, I feel like maybe there was miscommunication, misunderstanding. Um, and I do have some real concerns that this psychologist at this clinic put his daughter up to it, in all honesty.
Is that what you're hearing from the other testimonials that you have, that children were put up to it, as you say?
Yeah, that the psychologist essentially convinced the children to say that they've been molested, so, and to increase their notoriety, and for them to continue to charge them these high fees. Um and so that's really hard too, in the sense of, well, you sought out these folks that are quote unquote known to have cases like this. And then there's this evidence directly from clients saying, yes, the psychologist, like, we lied, like the psychiatrist, um falsified the evidence and documents. And so, like I said, I'm not saying nothing happened to his daughter. You know, if if something did happen to her, it's clear that she is traumatized. It's clear that she was the victim in this, and I don't want to take that away from her, and her experience. I feel like if this did happen, um, I want her to get the help that she needs. And so I want to be clear, I'm not saying that I don't believe anything happened to her, but I don't know if that was my son, and I don't know if it was the molestation, particularly given the evidence about the clinic. Um,
Mm.
and so those are some of my concerns as well.
Zami, you were neighbors with Dylan, and how has this impacted your reputation in the neighborhood? Do
It has,
care?
we had a really good, we get along with all of our neighbors. My neighbors have, some of them have, when he was first arrested, looked at us a little differently. But then when the charges were dropped for lack of evidence, most of our neighbors have been fine. My son, he's very busy at school, and so babysitting is not something that he does on a regular basis. So it's not like babysitting has impacted him. We were just trying to do Dylan a
Continuing to
solid.
babysit? Is he continuing to babysit?
No, he only babysat for Dylan because we were neighbors. And it was
Is-
only twice. That, like I said, that's not something that he typically does because of his school schedule was so busy. And so, he's athlete, he's a A+ student, extracurricular activities. He typically doesn't babysit. It was only twice that he babysat for them. And it was to do our neighbors a solid.
Okay, so it was just a neighborly uh, assistance, and he doesn't have a babysitting business or a babysitting gig.
Correct. And so even, Dylan's remarks of like, has this happened before? No, like he doesn't babysit. He he's been around younger children before because, we have cousins and nieces and nephews, things like that. And so like I said, is very much a shock. And I feel terrible about this incident and I understand the pain. Like, um, I can't imagine if it were my daughter. And so I I understand and I empathize with what's happening. Um, I
Okay.
just I just feel that this type of, he's asking for over $300,000 and you know that that feels a little excessive in all honesty and a little vindictive. Like he just kind of wants to ruin my son's life and I understand that I understand this type of trauma can potentially have a lifelong impact on someone and um but to try to ruin another child's life when again there's no evidence that he did this and they're taking the words or the quote unquote expertise of a clinic that's in the process of being investigated and three of their former clients are saying no, this did not happen, it was false, and they were aware of it. So I'm willing to help settle. I would like the settlement to be confidential, and for it to happen as quickly as possible. We are willing to increase the money, but I want to try to keep the settlement as low as possible as well. But that 300K just isn't, that's not something I'm willing to do.
So just so I'm clear, of course, we'll keep this confidential. Your insurance company has indicated they're willing to go up to $100,000. You have $50,000 in savings that you are willing to utilize.
Correct.
Okay. Um, if it was necessary, do you have the ability to utilize some other asset to increase that 50,000?
That's the most that I'm able to do. You know, I- if I do any more, that will be I have no cushion. Like and like I said, I have a kid getting ready to go to college, and so yes, he has scholarships, but there's other expenses, and uh, yeah,
So 50,000 is your max. Okay, well, again, this is confidential. I'm going to ask you to wait a couple minutes while I meet with Dylan, and then I'll be back, and maybe we can start to talk about some different ways we can resolve this.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Zami. Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Carolyn.
Dylan, I'm wondering how we can get past this issue with the out of town clinic.
When you say past this issue, what are you referring to? I mean,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
so let me rephrase it. You said that you had this had been recommended, this clinic had been recommended to you. Were there any other recommendations of psychologists in your area to take
No, I mean, I sought out the best care for my daughter, and this is the one that came to me. I very specifically, Zami mentioned that he's surprised that I didn't confront him or anything. I didn't confront him at the time because I wanted to make sure of the claims that were being levied against his son. As I said, me and Zami had plenty amicable, acceptable relationship. I had no intention of accusing Zami and his son of anything until I had someone else corroborate what was going on. It's not that I don't trust my daughter. It's that children at that age, it's hard to know what's going on. It's hard to know what they're talking about. And I wanted to make fully sure that I understood what was happening before I accused Zami's son of anything. I mean, I had nothing against the kid. I had no way of knowing the veracity of the claims of my daughter. I am not the type to doubt my daughter's words, but I know that children are children. And so this is why I sought out help. Everyone told me it was the best possible clinic for this. And I again, I think this is a very bizarre attempt by Zami and his lawyers to discredit my psychologist, potentially in case this goes to court, as a way of trying to discredit an expert witness. But at the end of the day, Zami said, yes, there are watchdogs that look out for this thing. The clinic hasn't been closed. And that's because at the end of the day, it's still operating. People still feel that it's providing a service, same way that the DA is still in a job, because as Zami said, at the end of the day, there's clearly enough people who feel that it's doing the right thing, that he's doing the right thing to keep him around. As I said, I want a resolution for this. So there's something I want to add to you, Carolyn, very quickly about what's been going on here. And I don't know if Zami's talked about it. I don't really need to know. I have made this very clear that I understand that there's difficulty for Zami.
This is confidential. I should have reminded you when we first met. Our conversation here in this private space is confidential unless you give me permission. So you can feel free to tell me anything you want to tell me right now.
I appreciate that. So I've made it clear to Zami that, given the difficulty of trial, and obviously, and I think this may be evident, it may not, I don't want to drag my daughter through a trial process. We both know what a trial is like. My daughter is still very young. She's experienced trauma. I don't want to put her on the witness stand and force her to stand in front of an army of attorneys and psychologists and recount all of this. If that can be avoided, if it can't, then that's what we will have to do, but I don't want that. I have made it very clear that what I am seeking at this point is a few things. I do want to see the fact there's been all this financial hardship to be recognized. I reached out to Zami and his insurance company. Zami had filed an insurance claim, and the insurance came back to me with a patently ridiculous offer. I asked $350,000, considering all of the costs. I've had over $2,000 in counseling.
So let's slow it down. I'd like to write down all the expenses that you've incurred.
Okay. Sure.
So 2,000.
So almost the 2,000 for counseling.
Counseling, okay.
Nearly the 12,000 for expenses relocating, and that's rough ballpark, not including rent and any changes that's happened since that I've had to incur. Therapy for my daughter over the past few years has been in the couple thousands.
Okay. So is the therapy different than the $2,000 in counseling?
Slightly different. That initial $2,000 in counseling has been since the incident. So the $3,000 has been the immediate therapy sessions recommended to me by the clinic in order to reduce long-term emotional damage. That was a prescribed therapy course, and that was about $3,000.
That was $3,000.
The $2,000 in counseling has been since then, and that's actually been for my wife, not for my daughter.
Okay.
Somewhat different. Again, my wife has had a very hard time dealing with all of this.
Yes.
It put incredible strain on our marriage. It caused her to have to leave for a little while to deal with all of this, and putting my daughter through having separated parents was quite difficult. I've had attorney fees. I've had all of these other things. So I initially asked for $350,000, providing a clear breakdown of what those expenses were. Zami's insurance suggested they would be willing to pay no more than $60,000, which barely even covers some of my basic costs for what's going to need to be continued counseling for my daughter. I made it clear that that was not an acceptable amount, and Zami kind of hid behind the insurance. Both Zami and I know that if this goes to trial, and I think the chances that his son would be recognized as guilty are pretty good, given that I have expert testimony. At that point, the insurance would more or less abandon Zami because this would fall under the intentional act clause. So at that point, all the financial burden of having to deal with this would transfer directly to Zami. So I'm hoping that he recognizes that, it's in his best interest as well as ours to find a better resolution for this. I am willing to go down from the 350,000. I understand that that's a lot. It's not my intent here to try and, seek additional money. I'm happy to talk about just getting my actual costs covered. And I have the exact number of more or less what I estimate all of the costs that all of this has caused to me. Zami has mentioned counseling for his son. Absolutely. I am of the opinion that, if his son is genuinely innocent, which I have to admit I find unlikely, then he should receive counseling for this incident. If he is guilty of this, then he should receive counseling to try and help reduce this problem. I don't want to ruin this kid's future. I just don't want this to happen to anyone else. And, potentially the clinic that I worked with offers these kind of services. I mean, again, they are recognized experts in this and in dealing with individuals who've gone through it. It could be an opportunity to also have his son go to that clinic and get counseling from them as well, because they are recognized experts.
So tell me more about why you're raising the issue of Zami's son getting counseling.
Just because he brought it up earlier in his thing. He was mentioning in his public situation that he was willing. I don't want this kid. I mean,
okay, but does that impact the what you're seeking?
Yes, I do believe that making sure that there is a course of action by which it is ensured that his son will not do this to anyone else is important for me. I do feel.
Okay, so what would that look like as part of an offer to him? Would it be a requirement, a suggestion? How would this look?
I mean, it sounds to me like a suggestion. It sounds like Zami and I are actually on the same page in that, and I would assume, that he would want the best for his son in terms of counseling. I'm not suggesting that his son needs to go to counseling to be corrected by any means, but I'm suggesting that clearly this kid may need counseling after this whole ordeal, either because he did inappropriate acts and should receive counseling for that, or because he's gone through a traumatic process himself, which I do recognize. I know that it's not fun going to trial. I've been experiencing it for the past few years. And he may need counseling for that. I think counseling is clearly in both of our best interests, and doing it with someone who specializes in these kinds of cases strikes me as a benefit, but not a requirement as far as I'm concerned.
So you would like an offer to include a suggestion that Zami's son get counseling, and perhaps that counseling be done at the same clinic?
For me, I make that offer because I know that they specialize in it. And, despite Zami's lawyers' attempts to undermine that, I think even they will recognize these are experts in this. They're not going to be pushing his son to say that he too was molested, that this is about providing good psychological treatment for someone who may or may not be in very much desperate need of it.
Right. I just want to point out that I heard Zami talk about the claims against the clinic and, in fact, potentially against their credibility. So, um, is that something you'd still like to include, making the recommendation that he get counseling at this particular clinic?
If he has a different recommendation for someone who specializes in these kinds of situations, and by these kinds of situations, I am clarifying that as far as I am concerned, Zami's son should seek treatment for potentially what is disturbing behavior, especially if he's about to go off to college. If Zami prefers to portray that as behavior for traumatic experience, that's fine, but I would like it to be an expert who deals with these kind of cases. He can do his own research. If he has a different alternative he'd like to offer, that's great. If not, I know a clinic that specializes in these exact types of situations, hence my offer there.
Okay. So when you say these types of situations, can you tell me more about that?
Sure. The clinic specializes in child rape and child molestation cases with a particular focus on both victims and perpetrators, and trying to help people make sense of these situations and also address them in youths and juveniles. They are a fully certified psychological institute. You know, they offer a wide range of psychological services and counseling. I've been using them quite extensively, not just for things related to child molestation. My wife goes there to be part of a support group and receive counseling. You know, and that hasn't had anything to do with her being molested. It's just been her going there for psychological assistance.
So how do you think Zami would respond to this particular suggestion being included in your offer?
I think that if the clinic is the problem, I am willing to forego that if he finds a comparable expert. I think it sounds like he and I are both in agreement that treatment for his son is beneficial. While we may have different reasons for feeling that, I think we both agree on it. And he said as much during our group session that is something he recognized. I am encouraging that and would very much like to see that being agreed to, because I do think it will be beneficial moving forward.
So you want to suggest that he gets counseling because he's a perpetrator?
I'm not married to the language. I would like to see him receive counseling, and Zami is welcome to spin that however he would like. But I would like to see him receive counseling, and either that is because a psychologist will find that he is a perpetrator and will work with him to address that, or because a psychologist will find something else. I don't know. My motivation for wanting him to do that is, yes, I believe that he is the perpetrator, and I feel that having counseling at his age, I recognize he's young, this is the time to course correct. So I feel that, you know, seeing a psychologist will assist in that process, and one who knows what these types of cases are like and knows how to deal with these types of cases is, in my mind, beneficial for everyone involved.
All right, so we're gonna need some time to work on that particular language.
Okay,
So
absolutely.
right now, I just want to stick that over in the parking lot if we
Okay.
could, so we can talk about some of the financial damages. But let's give it some additional thought about how you want to write that. Do we want to, how specific do you want to be in that offer? Oh, I think Francis is back.
I also sent you a message on the chat.
Oh, okay.
I also didn't see it, and they had just been to you.
No, I sent it directly to the mediator.
Okay. There's only 20 minutes left. This goes so fast.
I know. Anyway, sorry, let me get back in character.
So, okay, yeah. So let's so I'd like to just spend some time later figuring out how you want that language to look and how we think it would be acceptable to Zami. But let's talk about these the financial damages. You've got the $3,000 in the initial therapy, $2,000 in counseling for your wife, $12,000 in moving expenses. You also mentioned attorney fees.
Sure, yes.
How much were those?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can simplify this by giving you a bit of a sense of what I'm willing to accept from Zami, which may be a little more helpful in terms of putting numbers to what I'm seeking. So I had originally made the request of $350,000, which included all of those expenses tallied up.
Okay.
I don't want this to drag on much more. I am potentially willing to go down to $200,000. This still will leave me with a significant amount of burden. The base cost for my daughter's continued treatment moving forward is $125,000. That, for me, and I'd like this to stay between us, would be the absolute bare minimum I'm willing to go to, is ensuring that out of this comes the financial stability to address my daughter's continued psychological needs from this incident. 200,000 is what I would like in order to recoup some of my costs, given the move, given the attorneys, given everything else. But if that really becomes a sticking point, I am willing to go even further down, as long as I am ensuring that my daughter is going to have everything needed to continue to receive psychological care. And I do not want to shoulder that burden, because I do believe there is blame here.
So it sounds like your biggest concern is making sure your daughter has that continued support for the rest of her
Correct.
life.
I'm not here to try and punish Zami financially. I've already suffered enough. I'm not seeking to gain extra money out of this. I would like to recoup my costs. And if I really can't recoup my costs, then I would like to be able to ensure that my daughter is taken care of.
Okay. So we've already, I just want to jump back to the issue that you raised about the insurance company. So it sounds like at this point, your belief is that the insurance would not cover the liability.
The insurance right now is basically telling Zami we'll pay out $61,000. That's the
Right.
most we're willing to pay out for this entire situation. And I think what's difficult, and I recognize this is probably difficult for Zami, is that if this goes to trial, the insurance is most likely to say, well, if your son is convicted, then this is an intentional act and liability doesn't cover you at all. So this is now completely on you. His insurance has made a half-assed offer to try and bail themselves out of this situation and bail themselves out of trial on the offhand chance that, somehow it's determined that more money needs to be awarded. I'm not sure. I doubt his insurance company is helping him out. But their offer has been patently ridiculous. I think Zami knows that. I know that.
If this does go to trial and an award is made to you and the insurance company will not be liable, as we've discussed, does Zami have the money? How would you get that money that you need for your daughter's continued care?
That would end up being the purview of the courts in my mind. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't really understand how it happens. The claim that I've suggested in court is the $350,000. Again, I'm not interested in penalizing Zami if I don't have to. I am trying to recover my costs.
Right. But my thought here is, if you do get a judgment against Zami's son, is it realistic that you'll actually get any money and get the money that you need going forward?
I'll admit I don't know how the legal system in this case works. My attorneys have suggested to me that, we would proceed forward on. My understanding from my attorney is that if the case moves forward, the process of action would be left up to me. That's what the attorneys have informed me of, that the next steps and what the judge will ask is what I'm seeking.
Yeah. And I think that if Zami doesn't have the money, then he doesn't have it to give you, and it might be more difficult for you to actually get it from him.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I've already had to make expenses that frankly I couldn't really afford. I had no choice in the matter. So I'm, I want to come to this mediation with the understanding that it's not my intention to screw up my or Zami's lives any more than they've already been screwed up. At this point, because of the actions of his son, I think that I need some kind of guarantee that my daughter will be taken care of as a result of all of this. And I want a recognition of what has occurred. I do want an apology for this. I mean, this has incurred such significant financial burden on me. And right now, through mediation, I'm not seeking to recover those costs, to recover all those costs necessarily. Through trial, I will be. If this incurs an attorney and everything else, then yes, at that point, I am forced to basically say, I need to cover everything that's happened here. And I don't know how Zami will settle that.
Well, I think that's something you need to think about is it realistic that you'll actually get that money? If he doesn't have it, then he can't give it to you. And this is something that will be hanging out there for a very long time, and this will not be resolved.
But in this particular case, wouldn't I still just I'd be in the same place I was before, having already made these expenses, already owing significantly. I don't want to, but I already am. I've already spent this money.
You told me that your goal today was to come up with a resolution, and you've
Correct.
told me that it's really important to you that you have the money to pay for your daughter's continued care, and you don't want to shoulder that burden.
Of course. But I've already shouldered the burden of it for the past 3 years. I've shouldered my wife's counseling burden. I've shouldered the moving costs. All of this I am now willing to let go in the pursuit of getting a resolution, but I already have debt as a result of that. So
Yes,
to tell me what happens if Zami is not in debt, and what happens if it puts Zami in debt? Well, I am in debt. You asked me if I want to be in that situation, or if I want to put Zami in that situation. I'm already there. So
so
what
is
do I
my goal.
lose?
My goal here is to help you come up with a solution that's actually going to work.
Agreed.
You both told me that you wanted this resolved quickly.
Agreed.
Now we're talking about a jury trial where the insurance company is looking like they will not be liable, and you'll have to try to get this money out of Zami, which
Correct.
you may not have.
Correct. Correct. And I don't know. I don't know Zami's financial situation. I couldn't speak to that.
So, considering the risk of going to trial, what's your bottom line financial compensation?
Sure. So as I've said, the things that are important to me is I first want recognition of, I want an apology. I mean,
Want an apology?
I've heard from Zami that he recognizes the emotional trauma, but this has put us to such difficulty. I mean, Zami didn't even really answer your question about how it's affected his family other than his son. It's affected my entire family. I would like recognition of that. And I don't need it to go to trial for that, but I'd like recognition for that. As
So
I've said,
what I'd
yep,
like to do is I'm going to go back to Zami in a few minutes. Let's think about what you want that apology to look like. So when you have your time to yourself, when I'm with Zami, can you start writing down what you want that apology to look like?
sure.
And also the concept of the suggestion for counseling. I'll try to work with you to come up with something. In the meantime, what's your bottom line financial?
As I said, what I'd like to seek is something around $200,000 between us. My absolute minimum bottom line is 125, the bare minimum needed to maintain future counseling for my daughter. The $200,000 includes a few expenses that I've had to already incur between moving and everything else, but I am not so determined to stop this resolution over a question of that amount of money. I would like to get that money back because of my debts, but if not, I will accept the bare minimum of 125,000 to cover my daughter's psychological costs.
Okay. All right. All right. So it looks like at this point you do you want me to share the $200,000 offer with
Please,
Zami? Okay,
please.
so I'll share that with him. Um, and how would you like me to approach the two outstanding issues, the apology and the suggestion for counseling?
I mean, the apology you're welcome to share with him. I think that's always been clear. I've wanted recognition for this case. I don't need it in court. I'm willing to accept it from Zami I'll think about, as you said, what form I want that to take. I don't necessarily need that to be some public declaration. I just, from an emotional perspective, through everything I've gone through, I just want the recognition of what's happened here. And there may need to be a deeper conversation about that. And then yes, now that we've brought up this topic of counseling for Zami's son, and that Zami seems to have expressed an openness to it, I think I would very much like for some kind of discussion around that to occur. If Zami has issues formalizing that, that can be discussed. But I do think it's important that this be part of our agreement, especially if informal. And as I said, I've offered the clinic.
Right, I understand. Okay. All right. Dylan, I'm going to go back and talk to Zami privately. Again, what we've talked about is confidential with the exception of this offer of the $200,000 and the apology and the counseling suggestion. Okay. I'd like you to work on some specifics of those two outstanding items. So that we can talk about in more detail
Absolutely.
when we're together again. Hi, Zami. Thank you for your patience. Just want to remind you that we're here in a confidential session. Zami, I have spoken to Dylan extensively. He has made an offer. He is willing to change his offer of the 350,000, and he's now seeking 200,000. In addition, and I think he mentioned this in of course, he mentioned it in our session. He wants some sort of recognition of what happened. He is seeking some sort of an apology, not a public apology, but a recognition in some way. We don't have any specific language around that. It's a concept at this point, but he'd like some sort of recognition over what happened and the impact it's had on him. He would also like to include a suggestion that your son seek counseling. He thought that that was something you were also open to. And again, we don't have any specifics at this time, but I wanted to just feel you out and see if you had any thoughts about those.
Well, you know, regarding counseling, I'm open to that. I feel like my son will need to with all of this anyway. Like I said, he was arrested, as a teenager trying to go to college. It's been going on for several years. Um, and so, I'm open to talking to my son about him seeing a counselor of his choice, someone who he feels comfortable with, so that he can process the psychological trauma that he's been experiencing throughout this process as well. So that's my thought on that one.
Okay. So you are open to the idea of counseling for him at a counselor of his choice.
Right. So that he could process the things that he needs to as a teenager
Right.
and how this has impacted him. And I the 200 we can't do the 200K. I'd like to get the settlement as low as possible. And so, I'll counter with 100K and see if he's willing to do 100K. Um, because again, that just feels like a egregious amount. Um, and about it's I can we can recognize that something has happened, that I can recognize that his family has experienced some pain. But I'm wondering what recognition he wants. Like I said, there's no evidence that my son did this. My son has not admitted to anything. I am not aware of my son ever engaging in this type of behavior.
Right.
No one has ever accused him of this. Like I said, he's been around other small children, in other situations, and there's never been any type of accusation or weird behavior or concerning behavior. And so, I can acknowledge that him and his family are going through something and that this is terrible that they're going through it. Um, and again, I have some concerns around this clinic and the clinic's reputation. And so, you know,
Is that something that you'd want to include in the recognition statement?
Well, a part of me is hard to create what I'm, to recognize something happened, but how am I going to recognize something happened when the folks who verify something happened aren't actually credible, like they're not actually credible. And so it's hard for me to be able to recognize what, the quote unquote molestation happened. It's hard for, or the inappropriate touching. I'll frame it that way.
What would you be willing to, if anything, what would you be willing to include in some sort of apology or recognition statement?
I can recognize that this has been a difficult time for him and his family, and that they are wanting to support their daughter, and that I feel that his daughter should get as much support as they need to address whatever struggle she is having. Um, I'm not willing to recognize anything regarding inappropriate touching or molestation from my son because there's no evidence stating that. And again, the validity of that statement um, through this clinic is really concerning for me. I don't know
Okay.
her, like the daughter's history. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if there was a misunderstanding. I don't, what convers my
Right.
my son does not verbally abuse folks, and so I don't know if there is a miscommunication. Um, so there's just some questions there for me,
I understand.
and I don't want to deny that the daughter's not going through anything. I'm sure she is. I'm just not sure if it's uh what she's claiming and what these in my opinion, irreparable,
So you're willing to recognize that the family is experiencing pain. I wrote down that you said, and it's bad. Well, maybe we can come up with a different way.
right.
Yeah. So
Um,
what I'd like to do is our session is coming to an end. We're going to have to continue this next time. Can you think more about this recognition statement, whether that's something that you think would work for you? Um, if so, how would you want to say that? And how would it appear to Dylan? Would that be something that um, that might meet his interests? So let's just give it some more thought until we meet again and we'll talk about it again.
yep, sounds
Okay.
good.
So for our purposes today, I'm going to let Dylan know that you are countering with $100,000. You're open to the suggestion about the counseling, and you are going to continue thinking about that recognition statement and how that might be worded.
Yeah, I also just, whatever settlement we have, it needs to be confidential because, like I said,
Want this to be confidential.
yeah, and I want to make sure that my son's, future is secure.
Okay.
And considering that there is no evidence, there's nothing that really says he's done this, I don't want miscommunication or misinterpretation of behavior to potentially harm
Right.
his future.
You want to protect his reputation.
Right.
Okay. So do I have your permission to pass that along, the $100,000 counter, open to the suggestion of counseling? You're going to continue to think about some sort of recognition statement and that this needs to be confidential. So those are the terms right now.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I'll pass that along to him. But I think for our purposes today, we should probably all get together. I'll wrap up. And Francis, I don't know if you want me to pass along this particular offer before we wrap up. It's
Mhm.
up to you. I don't know.
Uh, I can give you 3 more minutes.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll pass the offer along to Dylan,
Sounds good.
and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
You want me to put Zami in a waiting room?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's joining.
Okay. Hi, Dylan. Thank you for your patience.
Of course.
Dylan, I've passed along your offer to Zami, and he has a counter offer in exchange.
Okay.
First of all, it's important to him that these any terms remain confidential. He's concerned about the reputation of his son and his family. So that would be something he would need to include as part of this agreement. With respect to the apology or recognition statement, he's willing to recognize what he knows to be true, which is that your family has experienced pain. He's not willing to recognize that his son did anything wrong. He has concerns, as he stated, about the clinic, and he does have the fact that the DA's office has investigated and found no evidence of a crime. But he is willing to recognize this situation in some way. That's something he's going to continue to work on. We're wrapping up our session. Our time is running out. So he'll work on that, and we can talk about that again at our next session. But I want to let you know who he is at this point. He's, as you thought, he's open to the suggestion that his son get counseling at a counselor of his choice. And he's willing to counter with $100,000 in financial damages.
Do you want me to respond, or do you want to leave this for our next session?
We'll leave this for our next session. We're looking to wrap up, and we've got some thinking to do. I know you were thinking about some of the language that you wanted to write, and so is Zami. So we'll come
Understood.
back and wrap up.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, Zami. Zami, I did pass along your counter offer. As you know, we're out of time for this session. And I know there's some outstanding issues in some of those offers, the recognition or apology statement and the suggestion for the counseling. So we'll continue to draft those up so that we can look at those more closely next time. I wanted to thank you both very much for being willing to collaborate here and try to resolve this in a quick and efficient way that meets the interests of both of you. I do appreciate that. We will set up another session. Are there any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. So again, what we talked about is it will stay here. And I hope that you two will also keep those terms confidential until we resolve this.
Absolutely.
Okay. And we'll be in touch for scheduling. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so very much. I told you this was gonna be a serious case, and you can feel it. It was a serious case, and for purposes of time, we are going to transition immediately to a debrief. And I want to start with the parties. How do you feel the mediation went? How did it go for you? I'm specifically want to begin with Dylan. Then I'm
Sure.
coming to Zami after.
Sure. So let me start by saying, well done, Carolyn. That is not an easy. This is not an easy meeting. I mean, it's very hard to know how to even approach some of these topics. And I do think you did it quite calmly. I tried. I'm sure that in an actual case, I would have been significantly more emotional than I actually was. I went for combative over emotional because that's an easier emotion for me to emulate right now. So well done on that. I think you did it very well. I think you did a good job at trying to dig deeper into getting us to understand some of the complexities of what was happening. You did a very good job at, making sure that we felt understood, making sure that we had time to talk about, what our perspective on the situation was. I think you also managed the group to individual sessions very well. I think the group sessions could have become a lot more contentious, and I think because you were calm and composed, you helped guide it away from anything that could have been that could have basically turned into more of a shouting match. So I think that was very good. There were a few things I was gonna point at. Some of your intro, you very clearly said to us, you're gonna have to make some concessions. Not everyone is necessarily gonna leave with what they want. I have mixed feelings about saying that because it almost makes it sound like you're setting me up for, you're not gonna get what you want out of this process. In
You're
some
not,
way. But I think that's the
but
thing is
you're
that
not.
of course you're not, but I also think you don't necessarily, the way that you phrased it, I don't know. And I'd love to hear Francis's thoughts because I actually don't know what the right or wrong of this is. As the afflicted party, part of my concern there was just kind of a knee-jerk reaction of, okay, well then, what is the purpose of this? Even if
So
I
maybe
know deep down that I'm not going to get what I want.
made you feel like a little defensive or like shut down.
Agreed. Yeah. And I don't think that has anything to do with you saying something that's not true. I think you're completely correct. And it's important that parties recognize the point of this is not a trial. I'm not here to, be like that person is right, everything over to them. Otherwise, there was a few other notes I took. Let me look very quickly. You mentioned commitment. I don't know. In the initial thing you said, you talked a lot about language that didn't involve commitment, and I wonder if that would not have been better left until later. So you said we may come to an agreement without needing to fully commit to it, or without, and I can't remember the exact wording you used, but you basically made it sound like whatever agreement we would come to would by default be non-binding. And I think it's my same comment there. That's correct, and it's true. I wonder if the party would be defensive in that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I didn't say it very well.
No worries, and that's why I wanted to raise it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you were very good with fact finding. I think there were a few moments in which it felt like you were more focused on fact finding. And at least as the plaintiff, I became really worried that, like, okay, we're really focusing on this question of like the clinic, and I, someone in the very emotional state, want to be talking about something else. But you, for example, started our initial session by asking me, like, what is your feeling on the clinic? And at least from the perspective of party, my immediate reaction to that was, now I'm being challenged on the veracity of my claims. Like my first moment in private session, the mediator is questioning the authenticity of the clinic that I've used. And that feels like, okay, wow, now I'm gearing up to like redefend why it is that I've done this. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. It's just, that was my instinctive emotional reaction of, okay, first question is,
and that
how
was my
have you explained this?
intention. That was my intention to poke a hole in that.
Okay.
But I'm curious to hear that feedback on that.
Yeah. My emotional reaction to that immediately was to get defensive, was to be like, okay, now I'm, clearly Zami has gone all in on like, this clinic is not good. And the mediator has bought into that. And now I need to go back and defend myself.
So that shouldn't have been my first question.
I don't know if it should have been your first. I think it was a good question and I could see what you were going for. I think since it was your first question out of the bat, it sent me into defense mode, which in an emotional situation may have meant that I just continued to stay kind of defensive and be like, okay, now I'm justifying myself.
Right.
Otherwise, I actually did think you did a really good job. I really felt that you did a good job of managing some of the more difficult questions. You did try and push me towards thinking about trial and pushing me towards the like, what is the next step? What does this actually look like? I think with that, I would have also recommended, because you and I had a bit of a back and forth about trial. And I don't know what the right way to manage that is. I'd be interested to hear, Francis, what your thoughts are on that. But I actually otherwise thought you did a very good job in managing to like, think about this. What comes next for you? What do you want to see out of this process? And why are you here? And I think reevaluating that kept pushing me to thinking about, okay, why am I here? I want to be here for an agreement. Like, what can I do?
Right. But I also felt like I needed to identify the risks to you. Like I have a list of risks for each of had one for each of you that I wanted to come out, and that's what I
Yep.
was trying to get at. I didn't think I was making a lot of progress in showing you that risk.
What I might have recommended as a slightly different tact is also recognizing that I was very aggressive about, if this goes to trial. And I think you could have taken an even larger step back and said, well, why don't you want this to go to trial? And instead you focused on the specific risks. I would have let me bring them out and be like, well, when I think about it, I don't really want to get into this. My attorneys have said there's only a moderate chance. You kind of confronted me with the risks and were like, imagine what will happen. Like, what if Zami can't pay? And my immediate reaction was, well, that's not my problem. My attorneys have maybe said so. I might have let me drag it out and then use that as the way to be like, okay, you're saying this. Like, it sounds like avoiding a trial is in your best interest, right? Or that you don't really want to get to it. So that might have been the only way I would have taken a full step back and just been like, why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly I've already agreed. So somewhere in my mind, I know that mediation is going to be a slightly better option for me. I'm just hurt and emotionally vulnerable and feeling aggressive and defensive. And I think if you had drawn me in more, that would have worked better. While you kind of focused on confronting me with it, which, since I was already in defense mode, was like, well, it's not really my problem if Zami can't pay. Obviously I need this thing and I need that thing. So that might have been my only recommendation there.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I would just jump on a little bit to expand on what Dylan has said. I completely agree that in a case such as this, it makes sense to spend more time in fact finding, because you want parties to see things from each other's perspective. You want parties to have empathy towards each other. And specifically in regard to, there's no agreement until, I mean, you will make concessions specifically in that regard. To some, there are several, actually, there are two schools of thoughts. Some people will say, yeah, if you said you're gonna have to make concession, technically you are setting parties to be punching below their belt. And what others have suggested is, instead of using that word, you can, for example, talk about this is an interdependent process. That would mean there is no agreement until the both of you says yes to that agreement, right? And technically, by that word, you are, you're telling parties that you're not gonna get everything that you want, without actually saying you're not gonna get everything that you want. Now, me personally, beyond just saying this is an interdependent process, at the back of my mind, I'm saying, well, there are two parties here. Each of them have their own unique interests in the process. And if we are to scale those interests in terms of values, all those interests have different values. So as opposed to, for example, asking parties to make concessions, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking of, all right, how can you trade this interest? You get what is very important to you, and you give up what is not very important to you. That way all of you achieve your, your interest. And then specifically in regard to, for example, when Dylan talked about getting defensive when he was asked about, the clinic, that is also part of why I wanted Dylan to go first, because at the back of my mind, I'm like, well, it is good to poke hole in that, so that because oftentimes parties come to mediation with their biases fixed, that I should get what I want to get, and my truth is the truth. Your truth is not the truth. And for me, and for you as a mediator, your role is to expand the mindset a little bit, to have parties looked at, well, maybe there is another truth to this, but what you do not want to do is park that all in front of the other party. Because then if you do it in front, nobody want to appear weak in front of the other party, and if you make one party, for example, feel weak in front of the other, that one is gonna get firm on their position that, you know what, I gotta prove myself. And then for the other party, will be like, yeah, you are right. So at that point, you are setting parties to focus on their possessions as opposed to their interests, if that makes sense. Now we're back to Zami. How did it go for you?
Yeah, I agree that you did a really great job. I was very grateful I was not the mediator, in all honesty.
Right now.
And but also because like this hit a little too close to home, so I was like, no, if it was actually like a real case that was assigned to me, I probably would recuse myself and say no, thank you. Um, and so I was very grateful I was not the mediator. Some of the feedback that Dylan gave, I agree with. For me, there was one there was one note about your opening statement that I lost. So hopefully I'll circle back to it. But I do feel that you did a really good job being neutral. And so for me, I didn't feel that you were picking either side. I felt that the same level of questioning that you did for Dylan, you did for me. It didn't seem, you seemed very uh, distant from the situation, and I felt that you were able to hold the container very well because of that. And so it it allowed me to just kind of move through it. I did feel that some of your questioning, there was a moment where I was like, "Oh, I feel like I'm on trial," but then I was like, "Actually, it's like the same questioning for me you did with Dylan," and so I like backed up a little bit about that. And I think some of it's because I was also like my instructions was also like, don't really show too much empathy. Your son hasn't admitted or denied anything, and you're just trying to get this settled. And so I know I was struggling myself around trying to hold that to protect my son and engage in that way, and also not blame a child or like accuse the daughter of lying. And that was my own personal stuff coming through where I was like, I'm not gonna be like this 5-year-old probably lied, or maybe she been touched before and she lied about it. Like, you know what I mean? And so a part of me was like, oh, how do I act this out without uh letting go of my own integrity around the case? And so I was having struggle because a part of me is like, well, there are some ways I could poke more holes in what Dylan's saying, but my morals wouldn't allow me to do it. Um, but I did feel that you just kind of led us through the process. There was no judgment, I felt, throughout it, and I feel like you did a really good job. Um, yeah, I feel like you did a good job. I do feel that the interrupting when people are sharing, even for clarity, I feel like that could aggravate some folks. Um, But
Mhm.
other than that, I felt like you did a really exceptional job.
Yeah. I also wrote here, said exercise great caution, stopping parties mid-sentence to let them know.
So, so let's talk about that. So,
Mhm.
I used to do divorces, and um you have to interrupt because people, there's all kinds of conflict. Now it's actually really kind of hard for me to do these mocks because I can't believe that Zami had no emotion that his son was being accused of this. So it's hard for me, like it's hard to wrap your arms around, everyone's like so calm that it's not real. Anyway, I do these divorces and there's very contentious, and people and I saw people are just saying the same things over, and then they're yelling, and like you have to interrupt people. So now I interrupt people. Dylan ended up saying the same things over and over,
Yes.
and I'm like, oh my God, I know that already. So then so maybe the issue, Francis, is the mid-sentence thing, but I'm trying to wait for a
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I was.
It's very tricky. It's very, very tricky because so you are in a tough spot. I also do family mediation. You're in a really, really tough spot. But for me, what I do is definitely not mid-sentence. You know, I'll wait whenever there is a pause, and that's where I jumped in.
Dylan had no pauses. He had no pauses. He just
That may be my talking style, but I also wanted to say, and Zami, you may be about to say this. Actually, the person who taught me a very good trick for this was Zami, which I don't remember if you remember this, Zami, but you mentioned a technique you use, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share it again. I think you had a specific amount of time that you said you liked to sort of give parties to get into it. And I found that very useful.
Tommy also just wrote, it's the lack of recognition. So I don't know what that means either. So if you can.
So I'll speak to the lack of recognition first. So in my experience, when people continuously repeat the same thing over and over again, they want you to acknowledge what they're saying. And this is the note that it wasn't about your opening statement. This was the note that I have for you, was that you didn't necessarily summarize what folks were saying or directly acknowledge what they were saying. Like you would say, I feel like I could hear that you're frustrated. And then you would keep going. And so what in my opinion and my experience, when people, particularly when they're really emotional and they keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again, is because they want someone to acknowledge it. And since Dylan's request to me was like a apology or recognition, then that's what he was needing. And so potentially you could have recognized what he was saying, and then maybe he would have chilled out on repeating the same thing over and over again. So that was the first thing.
Right. I also think it's the mock situation. Like he only knows this. So that's what you keep repeating when you're yeah.
I might add some stuff to it. Like, I add that my son was in extracurricular activity and stuff like that. It didn't tell me all that, but it said he got scholarships. So I
did the same. I have no clue how the party was referred to the clinic. I went with the family doctor because that seemed like the most logical response.
Yes. So I think that's a really good point though, Zami. It's like, yeah, people will just keep repeating if they're not getting recognized. That's a good point. And I had a hard time reflecting back today.
Yeah. And
Plus,
then
dogs were making all kinds of my dogs were giving me a big problem here.
Yeah, no, I understand. I have two too. So, and then I do have a rule. My rule is if folks are going back and forth, I wait about 30 seconds, 20 to 30 seconds. It depends on how intense it is. And once I get to that mark, then then I interrupt and I have folks like pause. And so sometimes it depends on who it is, but I used to do that with youth and do it with folks coming out of prison. And so I would let them kind of hash it out, and I'll be counting in my mind. And then once I get to that number, I interrupt it. So, because sometimes that's what folks need. They need to just do that.
Yes, they do. And that's a really good point, is like, when do you, because I'll sit there and listen all day. I'm actually really patient. I can listen to it all day. But when does it become not productive? When is it productive and when is it not productive? And that's a really good point that you raised. You've got a policy. So I like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I honestly speaking don't feel like there's anything I can add on this, because I think that Zami has really talked about it very well, which is the recognition of being heard, and there is no one rule to that. Each and every party will require, a unique kind of attention. And for you as a mediator, it's just gonna have to, it's gonna take you just being there and understanding who the parties is and giving them what they need.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Caroline. You also wanted to try something new. What were you trying?
Okay. So In my divorce mediations, we're always all together unless there's some like major problem.
Mhm.
When I train for this types of mediations, we get facts and then we immediately go into like individual sessions. So
Mhm.
I thought I would try, let's talk more, even though it's a really uncomfortable situation. Let's talk more. In fact, I even would have talked more. Let's talk more out in the open and get everybody's opinions out. So I didn't run and hide in the individual session, which is what I might have wanted to do because it was such a touchy topic, is like kind of,
Mhm.
oh, let's just go talk about it here. I tried to bring more out. That was the thing I wanted to try. It was a, big step for me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Dylan
So,
looks like he wants to talk.
Yeah, I think I would have been a little worried about that for two reasons. And I think part of what went well here is Zami just mentioned that he had a personal thing that also prevented him from doing something that could have been a bit more problematic. In my instructions, it actually does mention that the daughter has claimed in the past that she has been touched and that those claims were questionable. So Zami could have gone after that and could have gone after that in the public thing of taking the much more defensive approach of my son is innocent, his daughter is probably lying, and they've gone to this questionable clinic. This is probably a cash grab. Zami ended up being a very responsible patient party in this case, which I think worked in your favor. I would have been worried that in an actual, if you had started in a group mediation for something like this, that could have devolved into a shouting match between the two of us of your daughter is a liar, your son is a rapist, and then going very aggressively back and forth.
Yeah, and
Um,
I would not have done it. I was
yeah,
like,
Did not do
I was trying to push myself to
yeah,
act a little bit more, and I was like, I
yeah.
can't do that.
mhm.
And I appreciate that obviously as the party, but I saw the moment I read that in my instructions, I saw that as this is where this could all devolve really fast.
It's evolving. If I can keep the emotions down, is that helpful to get that information out there? I mean, don't you want people to see like the other side, like what the risks are? Don't you want them to feel a little uncertain in their own positions?
Yes, but I would echo what Francis said, which is I'm not sure I'd want to feel that in front of Zami. I think if it had become a shout, I would never have confessed to that in front of Zami. So I don't know. Since it didn't play out, I couldn't say. I think if I had felt that you were trying to extract from me the possibility that my daughter was lying, I emotionally would have reacted quite badly and might have just refused to continue mediation at that point.
And I
Mhm.
wouldn't try to extract that, but if it's Sami's position, don't we want that out there?
I mean, but it necessarily the only position from my script was that, I want to settle.
Right.
I want it to be private. We'll be
Yeah.
willing to do counseling as long as my son gets to choose who it is, and my son has not uh, confirmed or denied anything. And
Mhm.
so even when you were asking those questions, I was like, how do I answer these questions around, like when you were asking questions around, like, what has the conversation with my son been? There was no way I was going to say he didn't deny touching her, but that's why I kept saying he did not say that he did this.
Mhm.
You know, that's literally why I kept wording it that way. Cause I was like, he hasn't denied it. He didn't say he did it. Um, and so we're just in this place that we're trying to move on and protect his future.
Mhm.
And but yeah, like we could have, and I sat with it for a while. I was like, what would happen in real life? I was like, in real life, if I was the person in the script, I would say, my son didn't do this and your child is lying. And but I was like, I can't do that. So
Mhm.
I'm gonna stick to how do I protect my son? I'm not saying that that your daughter did not experience something, but I don't know if she experienced what she says she did.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
You know, and so that was my way of like trying to plant doubt is saying, I'm sure something happened. Is it what she said? I don't know. And so that was like my little bit of doing that. But yeah, I feel like it would have turned into a screaming match in that if I fully played into the character, if I was able to fully play into the character, it would have. I've been like, your daughter's a liar. How I know you didn't do something? You told her to say it was my son.
Yeah.
But I can handle a screaming match. I can settle down. Okay.
So at the back of my mind, I will have two things. Number one, I normally I'd ask myself, why are parties in the mediation? And for me, that question comes down to parties are in mediation not to prove one side versus the other, but parties are in mediation to try to settle, right? And if we have, for example, let's say a contentious point such as this one, I will sort of play the devil's advocate and use these questions in reality checking. What will happen if you do not reach an agreement here? We're going to go back to the court. And when you're in court, how is that going to play out in regard to this, ABC? So I'm pointing out to the parties when you get to the court, your chances of even reaching or getting whatever you are wanting or you could get from this mediation is very low considering A, B, C, D. I want them to see it from the context of the court, but not from the context of mediation. That's what I would do in that regard. Dylan actually, Dylan and I talked, was it yesterday or a day before yesterday?
I think it was yesterday.
Yesterday. And in line with what you were saying, Caroline, every state kind of have a unique process when it comes to mediation. In California, almost the entire mediation will proceed in a private setting.
Yep.
And that is what parties know. And then when you come to, for example, like the DC and other places, it's a combination of both. You want to prioritize both joint and private. Some scholars argued for and against, there is no consensus, But for you as a mediator, being the expert of the process, and when I'm talking about being the expert of the process, you have the mediation process as it is known, but you also, each and every mediator have their own unique way of facilitating the session. You just have to figure out this is what worked best for me, and I know it worked best for me. How can I use this so that you can get to where you want to go? That's the only thing I would say. All in all, I really, really, really think you did a fantastic, fantastic job. I already talked. I love, your questioning was on point. I really, really love your body demeanor. I really love your body demeanor. It's so calm, and I'm not surprised that these guys did not explode. And when I was assigning this case yesterday, I was thinking actually last week, when I was assigning, I was thinking, if I was the mediator, what would I have done? And I keep getting back to, you know what? Maybe I could really elevate emotion, really, really high, and then try to bring it down. That's what I was thinking I could have done. But again, it's treading water. Sometimes it could backfire, but sometimes when it's off the roof, it's easy to get parties down. And I would have started in caucus. That is what Dylan, Zami said. I probably would have given parties a brief opening statement in joint setting, then immediately go to caucus and expand everything in the caucus. That's
what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I would have done the opening and then we would have went into caucus. But that would have been because of my preference of being okay, if I'm gonna do this. But I would have only done it in this session. If this was an option, I'd been I'm not mediating this.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, because I wouldn't have been able to be neutral. So I've been I'm not mediating this. Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah.
Ah.
So you would have just done brief opening statements.
And go into caucus. The rest, because the thing with this to me is a very fragile case. It is a very fragile case that anything you say or do can flip this case entirely to a point where there could be a no return.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I wanted to say.
You did a great job.
Overall,
Yeah,
I think, yeah,
seriously.
you did a
The
fantastic.
takeaway here, Carolyn, would be that you did manage this incredibly well. It is not easy to do a case like this, and you kept yourself in a good place while being relatively empathetic without, giving me or Zami the feeling that like you were completely on one side or the other, which I think, this is a challenging case and it would not have been difficult to kind of stick with someone. And so
Let me add two things. Sorry, two things before we go. So this is something that I want you to reflect on. I love how you laid out your process. We're gonna go from stage A, stage B, stage C. I love how you laid it out. But I was thinking at the back of my mind, like, wait, is that too long or is it not too long? How can I engage parties in my opening statement? And I'm thinking if I have, for example, let's say a well laid out process like that, I could share my screen. And while I'm talking to third parties is seeing what I'm talking about, that way they're engaged in the process. So if it is okay with you, I want you to try it, like try sharing your screen and talking to parties when you're sharing your screens. And number two, in every question that you're going to ask parties during the mediation, I need you to think that what is the purpose? Why am I asking this question? Right? And always, always let your purpose or the reason be to lead parties to a resolution. Those are the only two things that I wanted to add. Yeah.
I tried to do that. I tried to identify when I was reading this. First of all, I was not thrilled when I got this. I went into a state of panic. But then I calmed down. I'm like, why did I get this? But then I was like, okay, I can deal with this. I wrote down, I wanted to really identify all the risks. So I'm, it struck me that Zami said he sounded like he was being like, questioned, like he was at trial. And that was an interesting comment. And maybe because I had spent so much time like preparing, did I over prepare? Did I identify? I had questions written out already. Make sure I touched on all the risks, all the questions, all the things I wanted to bring out, like that I thought maybe, maybe it took away from my natural line of questioning.
I
I
don't
think so.
Yes and no. I think I also felt the same thing. There was a moment where I was like, okay, this actually feels like fact finding, and the mediator in me was like, I know what this is, but like for someone who's not involved, it feels like a lawyer doing fact finding. I think if you were going to stick with that, being more transparent about why you're asking the questions or helping guide people through that process would have been the alternative there. Of like trying to provide a little bit more of the because I also got the sense of, oh my God, I'm being grilled on certain things. And then I saw you do it with Zami and was like, okay, it's not just him. And I think either reinforcing and being like, this is where we're going with this. Like, I'm trying to get a better understanding of the situation. I'm not here to judge, like making us come back to that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not trying to trick you into admitting something. So I think you could have gone either way.
Yeah. I think even though I think Francis or someone said not to do this to me last time, I feel this would have been helpful, which is almost prefacing before the question. And so, I know I got some feedback not to really do that. Uh, In this situation, it would have been helpful for me though, because just getting questions in my mind was like, why are you asking these questions? Like, if you're not the lawyer, if we're here just to try to settle or something, why do you need to know what conversations I had with my son, so on and so forth? And so and in my mind I was like, I'm not going to say anything that potentially puts him in a position where he seems guilty. um and so So to me, some prefacing would have allowed me to relax around it, even
Mhm.
though I've been told not to preface questions.
Yeah. And one preface that you did miss, and this is the only other thing I remember from your opening statement, is you didn't make it quite clear to us that nothing that's said in a mediation can be used in trial and
Right.
remains confidential. And I think that
You're right.
very
Yeah.
important thing beforehand would have made me feel less like I'm dealing with a lawyer and more like, okay, I might admit something, but I know Zami can't use it against me. And I know that the mediator isn't going to be called to testify and be like, I heard him say that his daughter is a liar, and
Yeah.
now her
It's
credibility is
particularly,
undermined.
yeah, particularly
Mhm.
So
important in this case. Yeah, I did miss that.
Mhm. Yeah. So if I take a very narrow idea, I would say, well, the risks in the mediation is you walk out of mediation without an agreement. That's the only risks. But then in court, the risk is you're gonna lose, right? So if I have anything that I really think parties need to know, I will ask it from the race of outside the court. And everything that I'm gonna ask during the mediation is gonna be in the context of, even if it's not what you want, it is the best that you're gonna get. And sometimes it is really good to prepare, but also sometimes over preparing is not the best. But when I was signing in absolute transparency, when I was signing this case, I said, if there is anybody who can do this case, it's Caroline. So I was intentional about giving you this case, and to me, I felt like you did. If I was a party, I definitely will come back to you again. I'll come back to you again. I feel like you did a very good job.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback, everyone.
Well, I thank you all. Yes, please.
I actually wanted to add something just very quickly based on a conversation we had last time, because I sat in on a California evaluative mediation this Tuesday. And one thing that the mediator used that I was quite fascinated by is he actually used the same breathing technique you used, Zami, and he used it to surprisingly good effect, but in a very unusual way, which is after he did this very long introduction, he said, okay, I've said a lot. I want to give you guys the moment to reflect and ask any questions. But before we do that, to slow myself down, I'm going to have us take a breath. So he kind of put it on himself as a, like, I'm going to need this, but we're all going to do it together. And it worked surprisingly well, because I think he also allowed the parties to think for a moment about, okay, I just got like a ton of information spewed at me. Like, I'm going to calm down. I've heard a lot of rules and regulations and norms, what we can and cannot do. Like, let's pause and then think about, do I have any questions? So I actually found that was super effective in the way that he did that, especially because he sort of took it on himself. And instead of saying like, you guys need to calm down and let's, not that that's what you say, but instead of framing it that way, he literally framed it as, I'm going to calm down and I'm going to let you guys think about it. So I thought that was a surprisingly effective technique. And I wanted to share to kind of continue our conversation around breath work, because I also had initial hesitations, and yet he did it in a way that worked surprisingly well for very contentious parties.
Definitely.
What do you think about that, Francis?
I think it is relevant on a case-by-case basis. Some parties will appreciate it, others may not. But like, if a mediator, for example, take it as, I'm gonna do this, then that sort of like limits the amount of pushback that they're gonna get from the parties. Then if the mediator says, you gotta do this,
Right.
So yeah.
But I think that pregnant pause after I mean, I do try to pause but I wonder if a longer pause at the very end, then people can breathe if they want to.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to give you a couple minutes to reflect and see if you have any questions. Maybe that's, yeah. I'm still not wild about the breath work. I think that might work if you live in California. It would not fly here in New York.
But I think that's what I liked about the way he phrased it. Is he didn't say I'm going to make us all take a breath. Was I'm going to take a breath. If you guys
Right.
want to follow, see what happens. But if not, he didn't kind of guide anyone through it. He was like, this is what I'm going to do. Give you guys the moment to think about it, and then I'll ask for questions. So I liked that, like Francis said, he took it on himself to be like, I'm going to do this. You guys are here. You're going to have to sit with it for a second, and then I'll ask if there are any questions.
I think it depends on the party a lot of the times.
Agreed.
Because like with youth, yes, they take the breath with me. With my folks coming out of prison, I'm like, I'm gonna take a breath and I'm gonna ask y'all to either breathe or sit here and process. It's up to you, but we're gonna sit in silent for a moment so I can process. So that's the approach I do with folks coming out of prison. Because until we build a real rapport, they weren't trying to do breath work with me. After a while, I had all of them doing breath work with me. And running meditations for folks coming out of prison. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, like it depends on the crew. And yeah, in California it is a lot easier.
Yeah.
So 'cause that's kind of woven into the culture for the most part.